Hello friends, loyal subscribers, potential new subscribers, welcome to the Evangelist Garrett channel. This is the third video in a series breaking down the creation in the book of Genesis day by day. On the first video where we broke down day one, it revealed it to be actually quite simple. We discovered that in the Hebrew poetic form, it made a lot of sense to break down the passages day by day instead of verse by verse. On day one, God created the heaven and the earth. His spirit hovered over that perpetual darkness, and he created revelatory light. He separated it from the dark and brought that cycle of order and deemed it good. On the second day, we opened a huge can of worms with this word firmament, and God separated the waters below from the waters above the sky in heaven. And he doesn't tell us why, and he doesn't reveal that it's good. First, before getting into the third day, let me read the third day of creation word for word in English. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and he gathered together of the waters, and called them the seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. Right off the bat, I want to draw a contrast between the second and the third day. In the second day, we weren't told whether it was good or not. Here in the third day, we're told it was good twice. It dawned on me while reading this that the first part of the third day that still dealt with firmament and the gathering of seas is better placed in the second day, and then the third day beginning with the yielding of grasses. I wouldn't presume to suggest that my thoughts should change the order of the Bible, but it is certainly noteworthy, that occurrence. Now, we can envision that maybe the crinkling of plate tectonics when it comes to Earth appearing, because remember, it didn't say God's going on this creative binge, but it doesn't say he created dry land. It said dry land appeared. So let's think of plate tectonics. The planet Earth is the only planet that seems to have them. It pushes dry land up. In other places, it caves it down. It kind of crushes itself in like an accordion, and that becomes the surface, right? Some rivers and creeks draining off into larger seas, and that makes sense because God said dry land appears as if already there, right? And the draining water exposed what was already there. So God named the dry land earth, dirt. We think of fertile, we think of life-giving. He gathered the new bodies of water into one area and told them, "You will come to this point and you will go no further." God saw that that was good. And now the third day continues. God brought forth grass on the earth, herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So there's our third day. Now let's take a look at some interesting things. So for the first time, we hear God specifying that his creation of grasses, edible herbs, and fruits are limited each to a kind, a type. That becomes an interesting point later for those who might suggest a certain creation can become another. There are certain secular theories that make such suggestions, that something can become something else outside of its kind. Now, we all know that mutations take place. You can take a plum and an apricot, which are both seed-bearing fruits, seed on the inside, and make a pluot. Nobody's suggesting that doesn't exist. Now, here is an open-ended curiosity that I have. Who will be eating the things described on day 3 that are edible? There's no animals or humans yet, and there's God only, and there's no stars, moon, There's no sun. It seems like an important time to point out the views here between the Christian view of creation by days in Genesis and those held by others, both religiously and secularized, who have the idea that thousands of years take place between them. As in the previous two videos, I want to point to the Hebrew pictographs, which are the ancient picture models that have meaning and relate to the later letters. At the beginning of verse 9 in chapter 1, we get Vamer and Elohim. Forgive my pronunciation. We have the eye, which means to watch or to know. It can mean shade. We have the A, which is the ox, the strength, right? Power, leader. We have water, which can mean chaos or mighty or blood. And then we have the resh, which represented in the pictograph by the man's head, the first, the top, the beginning. So taking those into account, we can speculate we have something like, through God's eyes seeing the strength of the water, he first tamed the chaos with his own power and commanded the seas to within their limits. You know, you can kind of get that picture from the pictographs and their meanings. Let's look at the Latin. If you remember in the first two lessons, we kept seeing this reference to super, right? And the idea was that we're not talking about a naturalistic creation, we're talking supernatural. We see in the passage congruentor is repeated. So God, congruentor, congregated things into their places, the water specifically. Notice the land was not created by its congruentor of the water, but it allowed the dry land to appear, which was quite interesting, given that God's creating everything else. Now, continuing in the Latin, let's look at verse 11, where we see germinatum, or to germinate, right? The seeds germinate from the terra, the earth. We see the word semen used in there, and think of how we use it, and it's being used in the context of creating life in this Latin context. In verse 12, we see the word genus. We use the term genus and species. Genus, of its kind, right? We see the word specium. So genus and species are present in the Latin in verse 12 of chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. It reveals God, but now it seems that there are secular sciences ignoring the idea for evolution. And I want to touch on this in just a second, but the Latin is so airtight that it probably could not be used to suggest crossbreeding of any kind, of any type of creature. Let's look at the German for a second. In Luther's 1545 Bible, it's a poetic form as always, but our verses begin with "Und Gott sprach," and God spoke into existence, right? Sammelt, to collect. He collected the waters into place. It's from the verb sammeln, to collect. He collected the water in order. Now, I find it funny, when I was learning German, in the 90s, I had a 1970s textbook, and the sentence we had to memorize first was, Hallo, ich heiße Jens, ich sammle Briefmarken. Hi, my name's Jens, I collect stamps. And we all used to joke about that because pretty nerdy. They had on the big sweaters and all that. Anyway, so Spanish, there's interesting terms for the water. Reunion, or to unite the waters into certain places. God produced the grasses and the fruit trees. In defining the creation, it's important to remember that it's not a naturalistic analysis of what is created. But the Unger's dictionary helps reveal to us that the whole point of it is who created. Und Gott sprach, and God spoke, and God created, and God commanded. The waters will go to this point and no further, and the land appeared. The definition is the work of God in bringing into existence the universe, including the material and spiritual existence. Note that on day 3, grasses, herbs, and fruit trees are made before any creature that would eat them. Water is organized. It's like God, you can picture him constructing a terrarium to prepare it for living creatures that will sustain life. So also these living organisms are made days before the heavenly bodies, right? We would need the sun for chlorophyll. Allegedly, we need the moon for tides. There's no animals yet to eat all these fruits. Does this lead one to believe that there are epochs of thousands of years, or that God is not worried because he's not affected by space and time, and he's just using his creative force to create things in an order that he deems fit? I want to go back to the point I said I'd make about the Latin and how it doesn't allow for the idea of one genus or species creating another. In one of my study guides from seminary, a book on Genesis, it shows how the creation narrative is contrary to very popular forms of philosophy and apologetics, and I want to briefly touch on how that is. Genesis is contrary to atheism and agnosticism and rationalism because Genesis says God exists. The Bible calls the atheist a fool. Genesis is contrary to materialism because it says any material things in creation are not eternal, but they had a beginning. Genesis is contrary to polytheism because it says there's only one God. Contrary to pantheism because it says God is above and distinct from all other creations. Think of the commandment that says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Israel. You shall have no other gods before me. Doesn't say there are no other gods. It says you better not have other gods before me. That ties into this pantheism because God is above and distinct from them and the creation. We've used and defined the terms primary and secondary causation. God is primary causation, outside of and not affected by his creation, but God is secondary in that he can act in it. Genesis is contrary to fatalism because it says everything was carefully designed for a specific purpose, and that man was likewise created for a specific purpose, to know and love and worship God. It's contrary to deism because it says that God is actively involved with his creation and can be known by man. Genesis is contrary to evolution because it says God personally created the world. It's impossible to recognize the theories of evolution with the teaching of the Bible. On that note, I want to create the distinction. We often think of evolution as one word that covers everything, and that's not the case. Microevolution does exist, a species inside of its kind creating some variation in its kind. When we say evolution does not account for everything, we're talking about cosmic evolution, stellar evolution, chemical evolution, macroevolution. There's a few others, but there's 6 main categories of evolution, and all but one just don't match and can't be verified. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed listening to this and learning with me as much as I enjoyed creating it. I look forward to talking to you next time. You can check out books I've written on Amazon.com/author/Nicholas Garrett. Hoping to have the new Just Tell Me the Truth About the Reformation and Counter-Reformation ready by Christmas. That'll make the 4th book in the series. You can also get my nonfiction history of George Washington's great-grandfather John, shipwrecked in the land of King Tobacco, the first Washington family immigrant to America. You can check me out across all platforms at Evangelist Nick G. Please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you next time. God bless you. May your work, as always, bear fruit.